No, we're not going to brand like Coca-Cola, right? We're not going to reach everybody that needs this particular service. But here's the great part about it. If you're doing things like that, Google and other, search engines are connecting the dots. So some dude in LA that needs a paternity test who never saw any of that news and never heard of the VH1 show, he's checking in Google. And Google is connecting the dots and says, this is now a reputable firm for this particular search term, right? And so that's how it plays out. It's not just driving that immediate result, but it's making those connections.
Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner. Today, we are diving into the incredible journey of Jared Rosenthal, a trailblazing entrepreneur who redefined success by challenging the status quo. After a decade in nonprofit healthcare and leading as CEO of Amerigroup Illinois, managing over 400 employees, Jared took a bold leap in 2007. He left the corporate world behind, bootstrapped his own venture, and launched Health Street, starting with the now famous Who's Your Daddy mobile DNA testing truck. This unconventional idea not only captured national attention, but also inspired the very funky VH1 reality show Swab Stories. But Jared didn't stop there. He turned his business into a thriving technology platform, serving over 50,000 companies. So in this episode, we're going to unpack his entrepreneurial mindset, the risks he took, and some of the lessons that he learned along the way. So, Jared, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
50,000 companies from running out of a truck. So let's talk about it. We're going to focus on two areas today, which is going to be how you can scale up as an entrepreneur, and then something that you've done very well, which is guerrilla marketing. So unconventional marketing strategies that actually work, which will obviously be quite relevant to our audience. But let's go back to basics. You have got a couple of degrees with in the health field. Maybe just talk to me how you got into this industry in the first place.
Yeah, so when I was in school, I was really struggling to try to figure out what I wanted to do. I really wanted to help people. I was an idealist and all that in college, but I also really loved business. And, I really struggled with it, but finally it hit me. I said, hey, maybe healthcare is a way I could try and run business and feel good about that part of my needs and wants, but also feel good about what we're doing. We're not just, pushing widgets out, but we're actually doing something that could really help people.
So
that was the thought anyway, I would say.
You got up quite high in the industry as well, and I think a focus on marketing and sales. The degree you studied wasn't marketing and sales, so what got you into that particular side? You obviously strike me as somebody who's a more people person.
Right. So the degree I got is you can think of it as sort of as a master's in business, but with a concentration in healthcare. So it was focused on running hospitals and insurance companies and really learning about healthcare economics and the details of different healthcare systems and how they work in different countries. So I was prepared to, go into that field, and I started in a non-for-profit and, doing a lot of analysis, and I kind of got bored with that. I really was excited by what was happening, which was they were sending out teams of people onto the street, and this was in New York City, in different neighborhoods all over the city, and trying to enroll people into this plan, without getting into all the details. At some point, I really wanted to get involved in that. And so I kind of elbowed my way into that role and pretty quickly figured out that, there was, I think at the time, maybe 40 marketing reps out there. And I would spend the day in the beginning driving from place to place and calling, say, hey, I'm coming, are you there? And a lot of these guys were pretty slick. And so they would spend the 20 minutes I was standing there with them telling me how good they were doing. And I never really got to watch them. And then I would drive to the next one. I realized I'm spending 6 hours driving and the rest of the time talking to people, but basically not really seeing how they work. And there was one RV, right? And we had a guy that was driving it, and he told me, hey, we need a fleet. And I said, we need a fleet? Why do we need a fleet? So I said, let me go out and watch what's going on there. And I sat and got a cup of coffee and watched this RV on the street. And I realized this is a team of 10 people, and I could watch all of them. They weren't stopping to talk to me. And I could then pull them aside, give advice. I could sit in the RV and do some paperwork and be there for talks with the staff and meetings. But I really thought it was a much better management model for marketing, right? And I also thought, hey, I could replicate this with another RV and another RV and grow by blocks of 10 reps as opposed to, one at a time. And so really flipped the script, and I really enjoyed that. And, it was healthcare, but yeah, it was the marketing side of it.
For those who don't know what you actually do. Let's go into what does Health Street do. And I've got a funky photo of you here standing in front of one of your actual RVs, which I thought was quite cool when it decides to eventually show up on screen. There we go. So here we've got Health Street, DNA testing, paternity, immigration, legal DNA, and on-site drug testing. So does that kind of give a good rundown of what the offering is?
Well, we do drug testing, DNA testing, and occupational health, right? And also background checks. So there's a lot of employment screening services, but then on the personal side, folks sign up for their own drug tests as well as DNA testing. But, and originally when I had the RV, I painted it with the drug testing stuff. There was like a urine cup on the side, and that really wasn't attracting any positive attention. And sometimes people would see it coming and run, if they didn't want to take we were getting a lot of inquiries about DNA testing, and I just said, hey, would it be much better, thing to brand? I'm driving out there all day. Might as well put that on the side. And, it actually blew up on day one. Like, it was just nuts. People started hanging out the window, taking pictures and stop. I want to, take a shot. People that needed the service were stopping. I remember a bus driver pulled over and, a guy driving a bus, and he came over to say, oh, I've been trying to get this test for a long time. I said, well, why did you stop now? 20 years and you saw the RV and now you want to, but something about it just clicked. Being in New York, which, the media capital of the world, it wasn't long before, New York Post and Daily News and, they all started coming and taking pictures and then we got a lot of press out of that way.
So that's real viral marketing. And it goes back to the basics of marketing, which is monkey see, monkey want. So you've got to be in the face of customers. Otherwise, they don't know you exist, especially if you're starting out as a new company without, massive budget for SEO, Google ads, billboards, etc. You had a driving billboard, and it was a place of business as well. So let's maybe go into some of this guerrilla marketing, because I take it you're not spending millions on Google ads, but you're probably spending some on, or paying some attention on PR, public relations, yeah?
Right. And here's the thing with it, right? They don't always hit, right? When you try something like that. That particular one hit beyond what I even imagined, right? We reach our business is a national business, right? So we have a call center. We're not just in the truck all the time, at least not anymore, right? And so we needed to reach everybody across the country. And so what this was able to do was put us on the map. And it wasn't just, yes, initially we got a lot of news programs everywhere and there were clips, but that was sort of come and go, right? The TV show was a good one because that had a little more staying power, right? But we're not going to brand like Coca-Cola, right? We're not going to reach everybody that needs this particular service. But here's the great part about it. If you're doing things like that, Google and other, search engines are connecting the dots. So some dude in LA that needs a paternity test who never saw any of that news and never heard of the VH1 show, he's checking in Google. And Google is connecting the dots and says, this is now a reputable firm for this particular search term, right? And so that's how it plays out. It's not just driving that immediate result, but it's making those connections.
In your current, let's just talk about the growth. You said you started out relatively small in New York, yeah? And now you're a national business. That growth from moving from one city to another is immediately, or one state to another, is immediately a huge business challenge. There's different taxes, there's different laws, etc. You worked in senior roles in other businesses, but are probably not involved in all of these things that make a business run, which is why these companies grow bigger and bigger. Talk to me about maybe going from starting it up with your couple of reps to when it started exploding and how you managed that growth.
Yeah, well, I was doing all the tests myself, meaning me and the folks that I hired to do, drive out to sites, go to companies, test folks. One day we got a call from someone in Boston that needed a test, and let's say it was $100. I didn't want to lose the business. I was like, all right, well, how do I do this? I called someone at the lab and figured out a clinic in Boston. Ultimately, had to pay this clinic $10, just $10, right? And then, of course, I had to pay the lab, but worked it out where the guy could do it. I sent them a registration code, hung up the phone, and I said, oh, that was easy. I just made $50. I would have made 60 if I had to drive out, but I had to pay 10 extra, right? And I said, that's a business. Let me figure out how to get these calls coming in, and long story short, we pretty much right away opened up a call center and started saying, well, the bulk of it, you got to know your product, right? When somebody wants a drug test, they're going to Google. If somebody wants a DNA test, they're going to Google. And when they don't want that, then they're not really, we can't really do a lot of outbound on that sort of thing, right? Either they need it or they don't. So this particular product really was Google, search engine driven. And, because of that, then it's very scalable, because then you could, build a relationship anywhere in the country to have those providers pay them their, collection fee, so to speak. Well, that's where you get that ability to grow.
There are a lot of individuals obviously buying the service, but you mentioned here that you've got a tech platform serving over 50,000 customers. So that's now obviously not just waiting for people to call your call center. How did you get into the corporate side, and what changes maybe did you have to make in your own thinking, or in the type of people that you hired, or the marketing that you did?
Well, the first thing I did was look for a platform that had low barriers to entry, like a database system type of platform that had low barriers to entry, so that I could learn it. Because even though I was in the corporate world, I wasn't an IT person or tech focused, right? And I knew there were some bad ones out there. And I knew that a lot of them had very low ceilings, meaning I could use it for a couple of years, but it wasn't scalable, right? And, I did some research, and what I settled on is basically the least well-known product from the most well-known company in the world, which is FileMaker, which is made by Apple, right? Apple owns it. And it was probably one of the best decisions I made in business, because, to this day, I'm still using that. And it really, there are theoretical ceilings to it, right? But I'm not going to hit them anytime soon. You could literally run tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars through that type of platform. But it's not instant, right? It takes time to learn it and build it. And I kind of fell in love with that end of it. And then, just to wrap up what I'm saying, initially built it for internal use. Okay. So my team was in there. So people would call in and say, hey, I need a test set up, so on, so forth. And we would go in and set it up. And then we would go to the credit card processing, right? Charge the card, copy the transaction ID, put that in FileMaker. Then go to the lab, set up the test, get the registration number, copy that in. And over the years, I figured out how to connect all that, and not just connect it, but also expose it on the web so that companies could then do it themselves. So now about 80% of the business comes through that portal, that web app, and they don't even call in at all. They're able to do it themselves, like they're accessing it directly.
So 80% of your business is coming through there. Now that is you probably didn't expect that when you started the business, right? You were focused on or maybe you had an idea, you wanted to go corporate at some stage, but it's amazing how the industry tells you what they want. You don't tell them what they want.
And you figure things out, right? I mean, and this is sort of advice for people starting businesses, that, you don't have to have the perfect innovation right away. If you have a business that you can get going and you're innovative, or you're thinking that way, eventually you hit upon some innovations that might give you that advantage. And they could come 3 years down the road, right? Because you start to really get to know the problems in the business, in the space, and start to figure out what some of those solutions might be. For me, I loved being out in the street. So I had that marketing experience in New York City, and I wanted to keep doing that. But another thing I figured out pretty quick is that wasn't all that scalable, right? Running a fleet of RVs is a lot of headaches, right? So I thought, okay, I'll just keep replicating this. We'll put an RV in Boston, an RV in Sanford, right? But that comes with a lot more overhead and problems than doing it the way I did it, which I ultimately settled on that, which is running it through a tech platform.
So that's an interesting challenge that entrepreneurs have, and you've gone through that process. Do you ever think you might go back into the RV business, in terms of, because it's how your business started, and there seems to be a movement back to people wanting to see people and people wanting to have that interaction again. Is this something we're going to see from Jared again, where you're riding around an RV, even if it's for fun?
I hope so. It's one of the, truisms, unfortunately, about business, is that the bigger it gets, the less you deal with the people, So I'm happy that the business itself is a people business, but it's not necessarily me that has that face-to-face. And unfortunately, it's very hard to grow and stay out there, driving the truck and running the business at the same time.
Now, I didn't want to get a copyright strike, so I didn't show a clip of your VH1 series, but maybe talk to me about what you learned through that. And that must have been crazy, because this must be like Jerry Springer almost, in terms of people finding out who the dad is, there must have been lots of drama. But maybe talk to me more about the business side of VH1. Did you make a fortune making each episode, or was this more a labor of love?
Okay, so if anyone's in that position, the first year of a reality show was very hard to make money that first year. I was in a really unique position because when we got the press, we had dozens of production agencies contacted me to try and make it. So I had some leverage there. One of the few times in my life I could tell, like I could work this a little bit, you know. And it wasn't just me being in the show, but also they had access to my business. So there's an agreement for that. And I was able to negotiate to be what they call an executive producer on the show, which is just a title, but kind of meant that I had the ability to review the footage before it went to the network. Because my concern was that they would try to turn it into a Jerry Springer, right? And I didn't want that to be my brand, right? I didn't want the, Maury
Come
Povich kind of
on.
thing, right? So it wasn't sappy or anything. It was more serious, but like the experience and what I had seen with some of the folks that I tested is that this is not a joke. Like this is a hugely important moment in people's lives. And, I wanted to be sure that I had control to make sure that I didn't videotape this thing and they turned it into that kind of exploitation type of thing. So, and from a business standpoint, I'll say, I never set out to do that. I wanted to be an entrepreneur and run a business. But at the time, I said, that SEO game is a long one, right? It's a long game and it doesn't happen overnight. And I said, this is an opportunity to get national exposure and set the brand. Like, it's the best business opportunity I could have had, right? So I kind of said to the folks in the office, all right, I'll be back in a few months. We're going to tape the show. And amazingly, that worked out.
Most people don't generate success purely by themselves. There are a lot of self-made entrepreneurs, but the majority of them have some kind of support structure behind them. As your business has grown, how important has your relationship building skills been or networking skills been? And I'll give you an example. You spoke about the labs. That $10 could be $8 if you have good relationships with them and say, I'll give you, X amount of volume a month, etc. Your corporate experience help with that, but maybe talk about how important it is to bring in partners or network properly and have the right kind of people around you to help you grow your business.
Yeah, and it's very situation specific, right? Depending on the type of business you're in and whether you have outside investors, whether you have partners or not. One key thing for me, which I never thought would work out, is that my girlfriend runs the inside operation, right? And that allows me, because there's a level of trust there, to not have to worry about that piece where otherwise I would have to devote a ton of mental energy towards that, right? And I never thought I'd be able to work with family like that, but that turns out to be a real key piece because I'm the sole owner and there are no other partners and you can't rely on that. The other thing is, if you're building something that has components of it that you don't fully understand, let's say the tech side, right? Hiring people to build your app or build your site or whatever. If you don't fully understand it, you then have a situation where you have a lot of risk of that particular, if it's small, one or two people, if they walk, you got a big problem, right? Because you can't rely it. And coming from bigger companies, you never thought about that. Like, all right, if something goes down, the IT guys will fix it. And if you don't have a ton of people like that, you have to make sure that you either understand everything yourself or you have some sort of network or backup. One strategy is oftentimes use consultants rather than hire people because they manage the turnover. It's a firm. So if somebody leaves, they have succession planning and are able to handle that better.
So two things here, and we'll do them in sequence here. Number one, why have you chosen not to have partners in this business? So why are you running it by yourself? And secondly, does your girlfriend get the RV to come over to you every now and then for a test as well? Or does she get an employee discount?
Right. This is one of the few employee discounts we can, as many paternity tests as you need. But no, in all seriousness, the question, I'm sorry, what was it?
Yeah.
You threw
So
me off with the girl.
you've just, yeah. So you mentioned that you own the business. Why have you gone
Right.
the route of not getting partners and bringing other folks into the business? I've gone through the same process myself, so I want to hear, and it's a difficult one. So I want to know your thinking, and have you thought of it? Why haven't you gone for it? Is it something that you're going to look at in the future? Maybe just give a bit of insight into your thinking.
Yeah, as a kid, I was always starting businesses and always grabbing partners. I was doing it my whole life, and then they never really worked out. And there's always for some reason, but like I feel like I just love business. I think about it all the time. I try to think of ways to improve it all the time. With partner, it could present certain challenges if you don't feel like you're on the same level of commitment to it. And then, it makes a lot of things a whole lot easier. There's all kinds of things, forms and taxes and all this stuff. Being alone, it makes everything orders of magnitude simpler. So what we chose to do, because I wanted to give other people the opportunity to experience this entrepreneurship part of it, is that we created an employee stock option plan. So now I was able to give folks pieces of it without losing that sort of control and that management that I really, really like.
Awesome. Just to finalize on the sort of tech growth stack, because you mentioned that Apple product and not going for the Rolls Royce like Salesforce or these expensive platforms. What other sort of tips and tricks have you got for us in terms of the tech side of a business? Because you mentioned that understanding the tech is important, making sure that you don't have over-reliance on one or two folks. And probably another issue is the next shiny thing. How do you how did you stick on that? Surely you had salespeople coming to you saying, hey, move over to my system. How have you dealt with that?
Yes. Tech is funny because people want to always jump to the newest one. And then sometimes I tell them FileMaker and they might know it from 30 years ago and say, oh, that dinosaur, right? But actually, if you think about it, isn't that better to have a platform that doesn't go away, that has evolved every year and is not going to just be dumped by the company for the next shiny thing, right? So almost nothing ever gets deprecated, or not, I shouldn't say deprecated, but they lose support for a functionality, right? System that I built when I bought a book to really learn it. It took me about a month to just figure out the basics. And that same first system we ran on for like 12 years. It never, of course, we continued to add on to it and realized mistakes maybe I made early on. Ultimately, I rebuilt it in FileMaker as a separate system, but it has the ability to really last and take on that additional growth because you can integrate it with other things. So in terms of the stack, right, when I finally got a professional, IT help, Anthony's my guy, my server was sitting under my desk, and cookie crumbs would fall on it and stuff. And there was no backup, or if there was, it was like a hard drive I would bring home and stuff. And he's just like, this is crazy, So he got to set up an AWS, and now you have replicability, you have disaster recovery, that stuff. So it's still that same FileMaker server, but now it sits in AWS. And then he was able to connect my backend to a front end. So that's built in Vercel, which is Next.js. I uses TypeScript. And that's that front end app that the employers log into or the clients log into to get their results and manage the testing. And then that all hits that same single system. So the other concept, which I think is really important, is having a single source of truth. Now, we deal with companies all the time that have 8, 9, 10 different systems, right? Their payroll is on one platform and their timesheets are on another. And their HR management is another platform. They do their drug testing with us, a background check. And it's crazy because, just coordinating all that, you're going to have errors. You have repeat work. So, my philosophy all along is the more I could build into one system and have one source of truth for everything, the more you can accomplish.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that sentiment. Talking about going to AWS and being more digital, since this data is not sitting under your desktop anymore, gathering cookie dust and spider webs and so on, data privacy must be a huge issue for you because you're dealing with very sensitive stuff. So I'm just asking for a friend, how do you keep this information as secure as possible?
Sure. So, the server, with FileMaker, you can encrypt the server. So, that's only a risk if somebody got their hands on the actual server, which is unlikely on Amazon anyway. But then, we use a VPN to communicate with it, and everything goes over HTTPS. And then we use, for the clients to log in, we use something called Clerk, which, there's various systems out there that you can leverage for your authentication and authorization. So those are two different things. Clerk does the authentication, and then when they log in FileMaker, we set up scripts that say what they have access to. So we really built it as an API, right? That's sort of a key piece of it, which is, if you're not familiar, folks, is systems talking to systems. So the web app talks to the backend app, right? And they communicate over this API. Clerk handles that authentication when they log in. And, we handle what data that somebody has access to.
So you take security very seriously. Awesome. Now, Jared, 2025 is looking very exciting, and there's hopefully going to be a lot of growth happening in the States in the next couple of years. What is the plan for the next 24 months? So what does growth look like for you? What does success look like for you? I mean, if it's you, Jared, and your team, other countries, making sure that that you are all around the US, more revenue, more time for yourself. What is your plan for the next, for the foreseeable future?
Well, it's AI, AI, AI. It's all about AI right now. That's, it's taken over. And quite frankly, it's a little terrifying because some of the growth that we built is at risk, right? Because, SEO is changing rapidly and sites are disappearing overnight. If your site is publishing, if what you're selling is your material on your site, you're already feeling a tremendous amount of strain because a lot of that's ending up in these AI overviews. We have a transactional based site, so you still got to come, but you can see that in the future, if you're using, let's say, ChatGPT, they have your credit, you put your credit card in there, and pretty soon they'll do the transactions over, without ever going to your site. What does that mean? That means we have to be ready with an API that they could hit, right? So that sort of operate headless. The site won't really matter, perhaps. Or they're going to start crawling the site. I don't know if you guys seen the new thing called Operator, right? So we tested that out. It's not widely available. I think it's like $200 a month right now, but soon it'll be part of the regular package. And they just sort of go to websites and crawl them, which, I thought was surprising. I thought they would stick with using APIs, but you could watch what they do. They go to the website and they sort of type around and see what's happening. And immediately I realized, well, we have to really make sure the site is readable by robots, readable by screen readers, or, the accessibility standards are much higher because that's the future we got to get ready for. So it's getting ready for what's happening on the AI side, how it's going to change marketing, and then also using AI wherever you can inside because, this stuff can radically improve productivity. And if you're not doing that, your competitors are going to be outpacing you. So it's really a non-issue. Like you have to do it.
Well, luckily AI can't pee in a cup just yet. So that's an advantage. But it sounds like you're excited for the future of this business as well. And I'm sure there are a whole bunch of other services and offerings that you're going to be able to bolt on. And when we were talking about new tech stacks for small business success, ChatGPT, Grok, AI platforms like that are going to be transformational for small businesses because you've got literally an army of people working for you, which means that the big companies do not have that advantage of you. So that's, I think, a super exciting thing for solopreneurs or small businesses to look at. Now, Jared, where can I send folks to check out your services? I'm just asking for a friend. I mean, nothing about paternity tests and things like that, but where can I send folks?
Okay, so it's health-street.net. So health and a hype.
So I'm going to stick that in the link as well. So for those of you who are watching, you can get that on YouTube and all our other channels. Jared, it's been great chatting and very exciting business. I'm going to take a look at some of your Swab stories on VH1 and have a bit of fun there. But thanks a lot for your time.
Great. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
I really do appreciate your comments. So why not go and watch this live on YouTube or go to my website, kuhne.no. That's KUHNE.no for more information.